Britain has systematically obliterated some of its most magnificent places throughout history, leaving behind ghostly remnants of former glory that the establishment would rather you didn't know about. Today, we're exposing 15 forgotten tragedies that reveal a darker side to British history, including one underwater city that was once one of England's greatest ports. Let's start with Britain's very own Atlantis. Dunwich in Suffolk was once one of England's most important medieval ports, a thriving centre of commerce that dominated the East Anglian coast. Hard to believe when you visit the tiny village today with its single pub and handful of houses, isn't it? In the 12th century, Dunwich boasted 8 major churches, multiple monasteries, and a population estimated between 3,000 to 5,000. Massive for medieval times. The city controlled the wool trade with continental Europe and even had its own mint. Here's where it gets properly eerie. The North Sea didn't just claim Dunwich overnight. It was a slow, agonising death spanning centuries. Storm after storm battered the soft sandstone cliffs, and by the 14th century, entire parishes were tumbling into the waves. The locals didn't just abandon ship, though. They actually tried to move their churches stone by stone inland, racing against the encroaching sea. The really spine-tingling bit? On certain stormy nights, locals claim you can still hear church bells ringing beneath the waves. Scientists say it's just the movement of stones on the seabed, but tell that to the fishermen who've reported catching medieval artefacts in their nets. All Saints' Church finally surrendered to the sea between 1904 and 1919, with the last major portion of the tower falling on November 12, 1919, taking with it the bones of countless medieval residents. Today's Dunwich is literally living on borrowed time. Experts predict the current village will be significantly affected by erosion within the coming decades. If you're finding these forgotten stories fascinating, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because coming up, I'll reveal how one of London's greatest architectural treasures was demolished just to save a few quid on maintenance. Coventry. Mention it today and people think concrete ring roads and that modernist cathedral. But until one devastating night in November 1940, Coventry possessed one of Europe's finest collections of medieval architecture. We're talking about a city that had barely changed since Tudor times, with timber frame buildings leaning drunkenly across narrow streets. The Luftwaffe certainly did their bit on November 14th, 1940, dropping 500 tons of explosives and 36,000 incendiary bombs. But here's the controversial part. What happened after the war was arguably worse. Rather than restore the salvageable medieval buildings, city planners saw an opportunity for their modernist fantasies. They bulldozed entire streets that had survived the bombing, declaring them slums, despite many being perfectly habitable 15th century homes. The real tragedy? Coventry's medieval cathedral wasn't completely destroyed. The walls still stood, the tower was intact, and restoration was entirely possible. But the authorities decided a shiny new modernist cathedral would better represent Britain's future. They kept the ruins as a memorial, sure, but imagine if they'd rebuilt it. Coventry could have been another York or Chester, drawing millions of tourists to authentic medieval streets. This one properly gets my blood boiling. Euston Arch wasn't just any old building, it was the world's first monumental railway entrance, a 70-foot-high Greek Doric propylaea that announced to arriving passengers, "Welcome to the greatest city on Earth." Built in 1837, it survived the Blitz completely unscathed, only to be demolished by British Rail in 1961. The public outcry was deafening. John Betjeman called it criminal folly. Even the government tried to intervene, offering to dismantle and rebuild it elsewhere. British Rail's response? Too expensive. They needed the space for a new station that, ironically, everyone agrees is one of London's ugliest buildings. The demolition took weeks because the Portland stone was so perfectly fitted that explosives barely dented it. Here's the kicker. They dumped the stones in the Prescott Channel, part of the River Lee. For decades, people assumed they were lost forever. Then, in 1994, historian Dan Cruikshank discovered that at least 60% of the stones were buried there. There's been talk of rebuilding ever since, with more stones recovered in 2009 when British Waterways was working on waterways for the Olympic Park. But somehow there's never quite enough political will or money. Meanwhile, we spend billions on vanity projects while genuine heritage rots underwater. Speaking of London disasters, let's talk about Crystal Palace. Not the football club, the actual palace. Built for the Great Exhibition of 1851, this wasn't just a big greenhouse. It was 1,851 feet long, contained 293,655 panes of glass, and after being moved to Sydenham Hill, housed the world's first dinosaur sculptures and became London's premier attraction. On November 30th, 1936, a small fire started in the palace's staff cloakroom area around 7:25 p.m. Within hours, the entire structure was an inferno visible from 8 counties. Sir Henry Buckland, the palace manager, was walking his dog when he noticed a red glow in the building. Despite the efforts of 89 fire engines and over 400 firefighters, nothing could save it. The cause was never definitively established. Various theories include electrical faults from old wiring, a cigarette left burning, or John Logie Baird's theory about leaking gas cylinders in his workshop. The building was massively underinsured. While individual concessions like the organ were properly covered, the structure itself wasn't valued correctly. Winston Churchill watched from afar and reportedly said, "This is the end of an age." Today, all that remains are the terraces and those wonderful Victorian dinosaurs still standing guard over nothing. Plymouth's another city that likes to blame everything on the Luftwaffe, but the real vandalism came later. Pre-war Plymouth was basically a living museum of Elizabethan and Jacobean architecture. The Barbican area alone had over 100 Tudor buildings, including the house where the Mayflower Pilgrims spent their last night in England. Yes, the bombing was horrific. 59 air raids that killed 1,172 people. But photographs from 1945 show many historic buildings still standing, just damaged. The City Council's response? They hired Patrick Abercrombie, the same planner who'd worked on Coventry, to design a modern Plymouth. His plan literally had a section titled Removal of Obsolete Property. They demolished repairable buildings because concrete was cheaper than restoration. Entire Tudor streets were bulldozed despite residents' protests. Today's Plymouth is a testament to 1950s planning disasters. All dual carriageways and shopping precincts where ancient streets once wound. Now, Tyntagel's a bit different. It wasn't destroyed in one go, but rather allowed to crumble through centuries of neglect. This is supposedly connected to King Arthur legends, perched dramatically on Cornwall's cliffs. In medieval times, it was a powerhouse. Archaeologists recently found evidence it was trading with the Byzantine Empire. The castle was abandoned in the 15th century when the Earls of Cornwall decided it was too expensive to maintain. For 400 years, locals used it as a free quarry, carting away face stones for their houses. The Victorian tourists saved what was left, but even then, the response was minimal. English Heritage has done better recently, even installing that controversial modern bridge. But imagine if we'd maintained it properly. We could have had Britain's answer to Carcassonne instead of romantic ruins that need steel props to stop them sliding into the Atlantic. This one's Scotland's shame. St. Peters Seminary was completed in 1966, hailed as a modernist masterpiece. It was compared to Le Corbusier's best work, a brutal concrete poem rising from the Scottish woodland. The Catholic Church spent a fortune on it, only to abandon it after just 14 years in 1980. Why? The concrete started failing almost immediately in Scotland's wet climate. The heating system never worked properly. Enrolment never reached expected levels due to Vatican II reforms that changed how priests were trained. By 1980, it was empty. But here's what really stings. It could have been saved. The architecture community begged for it to be repurposed. It could have been Scotland's answer to the Tate Modern. Instead, it's been left to rot for over 40 years. Vandals and urban explorers have had free rein. The concrete deterioration has spread so far that it's probably beyond saving now. All because nobody could decide who was responsible or what to do with it. It's listed as Category A, same as Edinburgh Castle, but that hasn't stopped it becoming Scotland's most spectacular modern ruin. Here's one that'll make your blood properly boil. Imber on Ssbury Plane was a thriving village for over 800 years. In 1943, the War Office requisitioned it for American troops to practice urban warfare before D-Day. They told residents it was temporary, they'd be back by Christmas. That was over 80 years ago. The villagers have never been allowed back. The military decided Ssbury Plane was too valuable for training to give up even a small village. They hold the occasional open day where former residents can visit their old homes, or what's left of them. Most are roofless ruins used for combat exercises. The church still stands, maintained by volunteers. Every year they hold a service for the displaced villagers. The congregation gets smaller each time. Most of the original residents are dead now, still waiting for a promise to be kept. The MOD says it's still essential for training, but let's be honest, it's easier to keep it than face the compensation claims. Wales has its own monument to neglect in Denmai Asylum. Built in 1848, it was the height of Victorian confidence. A palace for the treatment of mental illness, they called it. The architecture was stunning, all Gothic towers and sweeping wings designed to cure patients through beauty and order. At its peak, it housed 1,500 patients and was almost entirely self-sufficient. It closed in 1995 when care in the community became policy. But rather than convert it into flats, a hotel, anything, they just locked the doors and walked away. Within months, metal thieves had stripped everything valuable. Then came the arsonists. The Victorian chapel burned down in 2008 while authorities argued about who was responsible. What really gets me is they had offers. Developers wanted to restore it. Even Hollywood came knocking. It would have been perfect for period dramas. But the Welsh government couldn't make a decision, and every year of delay meant more decay. Now it's beyond economic salvation. Another masterpiece lost to bureaucratic paralysis. The Cold War's been over for 30 years, but driving through Oxfordshire, you'd have thought it ended yesterday until recently. RAF Upper Hayford was America's largest nuclear bomber base in Europe. When they left in 1994, they abandoned a small city, housing for 7,000 people, schools, shops, even a bowling alley. Britain inherited this ready-made town and did very little with it for years. For 2 decades, much of it sat empty. The control tower where they'd have launched nuclear strikes on Moscow became home to pigeons. The nuclear weapon storage bunkers filled with groundwater. Millions of pounds worth of infrastructure largely abandoned. They're finally building houses there now, but they've demolished many of the most historically interesting structures. The hardened aircraft shelters that could survive a nuclear blast? Many knocked down for generic housing. It could have been Europe's premier Cold War museum. Instead, it's becoming another housing estate with a few preserved buildings as heritage features. Birmingham gets a lot of stick, but the original bull ring was actually brilliant. Not the 1960s concrete monstrosity or today's shopping centre, but the proper market that had existed in various forms for over 800 years. Medieval merchants, Tudor craftsmen, Victorian costermongers, all traded on the same spot until Birmingham Council decided they knew better. In the early 1960s, they demolished the entire area for redevelopment. Not just the Victorian market halls, but medieval streets, Georgian townhouses, Victorian pubs. Centuries of organic urban growth bulldozed for a concrete shopping centre that was obsolete before it opened. The old bull ring had character. Stallholders knew their customers' grandparents. You could buy everything from second-hand goods to fresh produce. The modernist replacement was so awful they demolished that too in 2000. Now we've got a shopping centre that could be anywhere from Tokyo to Toronto. They kept the bronze bull statue. That's it. Centuries of history reduced to a selfie spot for tourists. Right, this one's personal because I spent summers in Margate as a kid. Dreamland's history goes back to 1880 when the first amusement rides were installed on the site, though the Dreamland name wasn't used until 1920 when the scenic railway opened. This wooden roller coaster was the oldest in Britain, and the whole seafront was magical. The Lido, the winter gardens, elegant hotels stretching along the cliff tops. Then package holidays to Spain killed the British seaside, and Margate declined with it. But it wasn't entirely natural death. The council's decisions accelerated the decline. They let developers knock down historic hotels for ugly flats. They sold the Lido site for housing. Dreamland itself closed in 2003, and mysteriously, historic rides kept having accidental fires while developers circled. They've reopened Dreamland now after massive public pressure, and it's had significant investment, but it took years of campaigning. The scenic railway was rebuilt, though some original elements were lost during the closure years. The rest of Margate's following the artisan coffee and vintage shop template where grand hotels once stood. Sheffield's Castle Market wasn't just any shopping centre. It was built directly on top of Sheffield Castle ruins, where Mary Queen of Scots was imprisoned. When they excavated for the market in 1958, they found the castle's remains well preserved. The architects promised to incorporate them into the design. They lied. Instead, they poured concrete over most of it, leaving just a small section visible through glass. The market itself was a brutalist structure. Raw concrete, geometric patterns, walkways in the sky. It was like shopping in a dystopian film set. By the 1990s, it was declining. The council spent years arguing about what to do while it deteriorated. They finally demolished it in 2015, promising to properly reveal the castle remains. The site has been redeveloped with some archaeological elements preserved, but it's taken decades to properly respect the history that was always there. These mammoth structures in Bedfordshire should be as famous as the Eiffel Tower. Built for the R101 airship programme in the 1920s, they're massive. You could fit St Paul's Cathedral inside with room to spare. They're among the largest structures of their type in the world. The R101 crashed on its maiden voyage in 1930, killing 48 people and ending Britain's airship dreams. Since then, these engineering marvels have been criminally underused. They stored barrage balloons in the war. They've been used for some films. Mostly, they've been the subject of various failed redevelopment schemes. Every few years, someone proposes something brilliant: film studios, airship manufacturing, innovation centres, and it dies in planning or financial complications. Meanwhile, these incredible buildings that should be a tourist attraction and working heritage site continue to age, while their potential remains unrealised. Our final tragedy is Tynum in Dorset. Like Imber, it was requisitioned in 1943 for D-Day training. The difference? Tynum was picture postcard perfect, an Elizabethan manor, medieval church, thatched cottages, unchanged since Hardy's time. The last message on the church door still reads, "Please treat the church and houses with care." We have given up our homes where many of us lived for generations to help win the war, to keep men free. We shall return one day and thank you for treating the village kindly. They never returned. The military kept it, using the manor house for target practice until it collapsed. They could have preserved it as a museum village, 1940s life frozen in time. Instead, they let it rot. The school still has lessons on the blackboard from 1943. The phone box stands empty. Gardens have gone wild. It's hauntingly beautiful, but it's beautiful because we destroyed it. Britain's really good at commemorating other people's vandalism. We preserve Roman ruins and Viking destruction sites religiously. But our own cultural vandalism, we pretend it never happened. These 15 places represent thousands more. Markets, music halls, Victorian baths, Georgian crescents, all sacrificed to progress, profit, or plain stupidity. The saddest part, we're still doing it. Right now, somewhere in Britain, a developer's eyeing up a historic building, a council's planning to demolish rather than restore, and another piece of our heritage is about to disappear. Because despite all our talk about preserving history, when push comes to shove, Britain's always been better at destruction than preservation. If these stories have opened your eyes to Britain's hidden history of architectural vandalism, don't let them be forgotten again. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with anyone who thinks Britain always protects its heritage. Because the only way to stop future destruction is to remember what we've already lost. Until next time, keep questioning the official story, because as we've seen today, sometimes the biggest threat to British history is Britain itself.